Well, the ANC has on numerous occasions called for interventions at Eskom to ensure sustainable power supply. The ailing power utility has been battling to keep the lights on, with the country thrown into stage 6 load shedding this week. The governing party believes that renewable energy is the answer. But what role can the ANC actually play in ending this crisis? Let's get you one take on this. Bring in Phumulo Masualle, who's the chair of the ANC's Legislature and Governance Subcommittee, joining us via our video link this morning. Sir, great to have you on the program. Thanks so much indeed for making time. We do know that there are, varying voices from the ANC, but let's take it as accepted that generally the party is calling for renewable energy as a response to the energy crisis. How then do we square that against a senior member of the NEC still batting for coal in an interview that was aired as recently as this week?
Yes, I have to admit that I think the connection is not so good. I'm struggling to hear you. Can you repeat what you've just asked me? Please,
sure, no problem.
I'm very sorry, the network seems to be a challenge.
Yeah, ironically, that might be because of load shedding. So I'll repeat just the thrust of my question. I'm saying it's interesting to see that the ANC generally believes that renewable energy is the answer to the energy crisis. But help us then reconcile that with how pretty senior members of the party, an NEC member who also happens to be a minister, just this week was calling for us to intensify our reliance on coal.
Well, no, thank you very much. Greetings to you and greetings to the viewers at home. The ANC is actually propagating not one form of energy at the total exclusion of other forms of energy. We are advocating for an energy mix as dictated to in the integrated resource plan. We do envisage a role to be played by renewable forms of energy, wind and other forms, photovoltaic energy forms, of course, including coal, water, all of these, nuclear, all of them, we envisage them to coincide alongside each other. Yeah. So there is not one at the expense of everything.
Are you, though, worried about what might appear to be, some kind of policy uncertainty because of statements mostly that have been made on public platforms around how we should actually go about this energy mix? Because, the proportions, for instance, it appears, at least on the face of it, are still being debated. How much coal in this energy mix, as an example, should we actually look into?
Actually, there shouldn't be any disagreements or variance insofar as the outlook of the ANC is, insofar as policy is concerned. All of them have got to be pursued, of course, within the framework of sustainability, within the framework that ensures that we are responding very well to our commitments to issues to do with emissions, so as to reduce the carbon emissions. So there will be a role for coal to the extent we are managing it in ways that are sustainable. There will be a role to be played by other forms, including nuclear. But all of these have to do with the ability to command the necessary resources to champion each of these, because their contribution also varies. So there is a role for coal insofar as being able to sustain our base load. But of course, there is a need to ensure that that is done sustainably in ways that do not damage the environment.
Yeah.
Similarly, we've got to, alongside, be aggressive in the other cleaner technologies going forward.
Interestingly, this week it's emerged that the UK has approved its first coal mine in 30 years. Of course, that's been met by backlash, mostly from climate change activists who believe that it's going to move the country away from its climate change targets. Another question that it does bring up, once again, though, is whether or not there is a sentiment that developed countries are actually being disingenuous about this move away from non-renewables and are placing that burden on developing nations like the country. How do you respond to that as a governing party?
We have absolutely seen that, and we do believe that there is a certain level of, call it dishonesty, for lack of a better word. Because whilst those countries in the south, the developing economies, are being pushed away from some of their endowments, fossils that they have, towards the more technologies that are driven, sponsored from the north, whilst when they are confronted with challenges, they are quick to come back to some of those technologies elsewhere they consider as archaic. We have, for instance, since the advent of the Russian conflict in Ukraine, we have seen quite an export of a demand for coal from our country. And of course, that goes to tell that you don't abandon everything you have. This is a good example that you're making, because at the time of need, you do need that guarantee that you get from such forms of energy. So again, in this instance, we would say that we are encouraged to abandon coal by all means is not entirely factual, or we should actually exercise our discretion in that regard.
Yeah, do you reckon these developments, not only what happened in response to the war in Ukraine, in fact it's translated in our side of the border as a commodities boom, but that and the fact that the mine has been approved in the UK, those developments, to what extent do you reckon they've dampened any kind of fervor within this country to push for renewables?
Well, certainly it's but a statement that says, open your eyes. Don't take all these as you are given. Approach them with caution. Appreciate that in the final analysis, people will always look at what are their strengths in terms of endowments and how do you use those endowments for the good of the country, but of course, certainly within a very responsible climate environment.
Yeah, of course, there's always another side of the debate. On the flip side of the coin, just today we've heard from reports on The Citizen, I think it is, about how the available energy coming from renewables has actually saved us from the possibility of stage 8. Just on Wednesday, just over 1,600 megawatts was apparently available from renewables. And had that not been there, we are told, the blackouts could have been more intense than they are, even as you and I speak this morning. It does, I guess, give credence to those who are suggesting that the government led by the ANC has been too slow to roll out some of the renewable energy that we're actually enjoying now. What's your response to that?
Well, there may well be such criticism, but the problem is always when we look at the crisis points, we tend then to compare each of these. Under normal circumstances, there is a criticism that the renewable energy program we have, the IPPs we have, particularly wind, even solar for that matter, it provides at its peak at given moments. And sometimes when you need that, if you didn't have your base load that largely is driven by coal, you would have been in 6s and 7s. I don't think we should look at these against each other. We should look at them together with each other. That is continuously. Don't look at one against the other. Look at it with it. What is it that we can do with all of them put to good use?
Yes.
So I would argue, yes, we probably started late with the introduction of the renewable programs in such a scale as we are doing now, but it's something that can be looked at against the demand at the time, as well as costs related to all of these being put in place.
Well, the argument is that the warning signs were always there. So even though the demand at that time wasn't where it is today, the warnings were pretty clear that we'd get here, and if nothing was done, we'd deal with the crisis we're faced with.
Well, certainly, we will not really put away that criticism that at a given time we ought to have really picked the issue of deployment of resources towards newer forms of energy, as well as even with some of our stations. I think there's been a sense that it took us too long before we could get on an aggressive new build program. So yes, the criticism, given what is happening, you cannot dispel it, but certainly we are trying to ramp up all the means available to ensure that there is an improvement in energy availability.
Sure. Gwede Mantashe, who of course is the Mineral Resources and Energy Minister, I'm sure you must have heard this by now, being quoted as saying that he believes what is taking place at Eskom in part is due to sabotage. In fact, he spoke about how, there's remnants of a different kind of state capture, and I'm paraphrasing here. I wonder to what extent that's the official stance of the ANC. I mean, are you seeing, for instance, units going offline and the depletion of some of the fleet as being a direct result of sabotage at the utility?
Well, more recently, we have been briefed by the ministers in that sector of incidents that do point to actions by some individuals to really sabotage the effort. Whether you're talking to coal providers in terms of the quality of coal they provide, in some instances the actions of individuals within these power plants where there would be either cables being broken into and certain switches being actually left to fail. These are things for which we have said let there be aggressive efforts made to ensure that those are nipped in the bud so that these power plants we have can optimally provide for the energy that they were designed and they can carry at the given time.
Phumulo Masualle, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Really do appreciate your time. He, of course, is the chair of the ANC's Legislature and Governance Subcommittee. Once again, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us.